The alien king entrusted his fragile daughter to a human, and she became a powerful fighter. HFY, the great throne room of the Thrylan Empire, was silent except for the soft hum of its crystal walls. Alien nobles stood in rows, their long robes brushing against the polished floor. At the far end, seated upon a throne carved from star metal, was King Theros, ruler of the empire. His crown shimmered faintly, not from jewels but from the weight of centuries of duty. His eyes, however, were tired. The war against the invaders had lasted too long. Too many fleets had been lost. Too many worlds had burned. And now, even his own palace felt unsafe. By his side stood Princess Illyra, his only daughter. She was delicate in both body and spirit. Her pale skin seemed almost translucent under the throne room lights, and her slender frame trembled as though a strong breeze could break her. For all her beauty, she had been sickly since birth. The Thrylan healers had done all they could, but her body remained fragile. Many whispered that she would never rule, that the Empire's line would end with her. But King Theros loved her more than anything, and it was for that reason he had summoned a human. Captain Marcus Hale walked slowly across the long chamber, his boots echoing on the floor. His dark hair was cut short, his uniform plain and practical. To the nobles of the Empire he looked crude, almost barbaric compared to their tall and graceful forms. But Marcus carried himself with a calm strength, the kind of confidence born not from bloodline or ceremony, but from survival. The nobles whispered in disapproval. Why would the king bring a human here, into the heart of their empire? Why trust an outsider with matters so delicate? Marcus reached the throne and dropped to one knee, not in fear, but in respect. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. King Theros studied him. He saw no fear in Marcus's eyes, only the weight of a soldier who had seen too much war. It was the same weight Theros himself carried. Slowly the king spoke. "You know why you are here." Marcus nodded. "To protect your daughter." The princess stiffened at the words. She looked at Marcus with open disbelief. "Father, this is absurd," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but laced with emotion. "You would place me in the care of a human? They are reckless. They are unrefined. They do not understand our ways." Theros turned his gaze to her, and for a moment the mask of a king fell away, leaving only the face of a father. "My child," he said gently, "our ways have failed. We are proud, but pride has brought us to ruin. The humans, they endure. They rise again and again, even when crushed. In them I see something we have forgotten. And in him," he said, gesturing to Marcus, "I see a protector who will not fail you." Illyra's lips pressed into a thin line. Her pride rebelled against the thought, but she could not argue with her father's tone. He had already decided. Marcus rose to his feet, meeting her eyes. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no mockery, only calm determination. "I don't care what you think of me," he said, "but I gave my word to your father, and I intend to keep it. I will protect you with or without your approval." The room fell silent. Even the nobles could not deny the weight in his words. King Theros leaned back, his shoulders heavy. "Captain Hale, I entrust my daughter to you. Take her to your world. Teach her what it means to endure. Teach her the strength of your people. One day she must return here, not as a fragile heir, but as a leader who can carry the weight of a broken empire." Marcus gave a sharp nod. "I understand." The princess, however, clenched her hands tightly. She felt humiliation burn inside her chest. To leave her home, her people, and be placed in the hands of a human. It felt like exile. Yet when she looked at her father, she saw the pain behind his eyes, the desperation of a king who had no other choice. The nobles protested, their voices rising like a storm. "This is madness. The heir must stay. The humans cannot be trusted." But Theros silenced them with a single gesture. His authority was final. That night, as the stars of the Empire shone faintly through the palace windows, Illyra packed her few belongings. Her hands shook as she touched the silk garments folded carefully into her case. This was the only life she had ever known, and now she was being sent away into the unknown. Marcus waited outside her chamber, his posture relaxed but alert, as though danger could come at any moment. When Elira stepped out, her eyes cold, he simply said, "Ready?" She did not answer. She only walked past him, her chin lifted, her pride her last shield. As they boarded the human ship that would take them across the stars, King Theros stood on the landing platform, his cloak fluttering in the wind. He watched his daughter walk, away, each step a cut into his heart. Yet he did not call her back. He knew that if she stayed, she would wither. Only by leaving could she grow. His final words echoed in her mind as the ship lifted into the dark sky. Only in their fragility lies their strength. The journey through space was long, and Princess Elira spent most of it in silence. She sat near the window of the human ship, her eyes fixed on the endless black sea dotted with stars. To her, the ship felt strange, loud, practical, and without elegance. The humming of engines, the clicking of machines, the rough uniforms of the crew, all of it was so far from the polished beauty of her home. She felt out of place, like a delicate flower trapped in a furnace. Captain Marcus Hale did not disturb her much. He gave her space, knowing she needed time to adjust. He spent most of his time with the crew, checking equipment, running drills, and making sure everything worked. His life was one of routine and discipline, while hers had been one of ceremony and comfort. The gap between them seemed impossible to cross. When they finally reached Earth, Elira was unprepared for what she saw. Through the window, the planet looked alive. Blue oceans swirling with white clouds, green lands stretching wide, mountains rising like giants. It was not the cold beauty of crystal palaces or shining cities. It was raw and untamed. The ship descended through the atmosphere, and the princess felt the weight of gravity press on her body. Her chest tightened and her legs trembled. On her homeworld, gravity was softer, kinder. Here, every step felt heavy. She gritted her teeth, determined not to show weakness in front of Marcus. When the hatch opened, a rush of air filled the chamber. It smelled of soil, grass, and smoke from distant chimneys. The sounds of life surrounded her, birds crying, engines roaring, voices shouting. For the first time, Elira realized how loud this world was. Marcus led her down the ramp. "Welcome to Earth," he said simply. Elira glanced around. They stood at a military base where soldiers trained in open fields. She saw humans running, lifting weights, climbing obstacles. Sweat glistened on their faces, but none of them stopped. Even when they fell, they rose again, pushing themselves harder. Elira frowned, her pride unsettled. These people had no grace, no royal manner, yet their determination struck her in a way she could not ignore. The first days were difficult. Marcus introduced her to a strict routine. Early mornings began with running. To Elira, even walking long distances was exhausting, and running felt like torture. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, and many times she collapsed on the track. Each time she expected Marcus to call it enough, but he only stood over her, arms crossed. "Get up," he would say. At first, she thought him cruel. "You ask the impossible," she snapped once, lying on the ground gasping for air. Marcus knelt beside her, his tone calm but firm. "I don't ask for perfection, I ask for progress. Yesterday you stopped at 1 lap, today you almost finished 2. That means tomorrow you'll finish them both." The words lingered in her mind. He was not mocking her weakness, he was demanding growth. Slowly she rose again. Training did not end with running. Marcus taught her how to lift weights, how to strike with her fists, how to hold a weapon steady. Her body protested every lesson, but each day she discovered she could endure more than she believed. At night, she lay in her quarters, her muscles aching, her pride wounded, yet a small spark burned inside her, a strange, stubborn desire to try again. One afternoon, Marcus took her into the city. For the first time, Elira walked among ordinary humans. The streets were crowded with people shouting, laughing, bargaining, and working. Machines rumbled. Children played. Music drifted from shops. Elira's senses were overwhelmed. She expected chaos to lead to collapse, but instead she saw order hidden in the noise. People helped each other carry heavy loads. Strangers offered food to the hungry. Even in arguments, there was energy, a will to keep moving forward. At a marketplace, a sudden cry broke out. A structure of wood and stone collapsed when a support beam snapped. Dust filled the air. Without hesitation, humans rushed forward. Soldiers, merchants, and even young children worked together to pull survivors from the rubble. Elira stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had grown up shielded from danger, guarded by soldiers who acted for her. But these humans, fragile, mortal humans, risked themselves without thought. Marcus joined the rescue, pulling debris aside with raw strength. He turned to her, his voice sharp. "Help them." For a moment she hesitated. Then she moved, her hands trembling as she tried to lift a stone. It was heavier than she expected, but with others beside her, she managed. When they freed a young boy covered in dust but alive, something stirred in her chest. She had never felt it before, this rush of purpose, this sense of being part of something greater than herself. Later, as the sun set and the people thanked Marcus and the others, Elira sat quietly on a bench. Her hair was tangled, her hands dirty, her body sore. Yet inside she felt alive. Marcus sat beside her. "You saw it today," he said softly. She turned to him, confused. "Saw what?" "The strength of humanity. We're not stronger, faster, or more advanced than your people, but we endure. We rise again after every fall. That's what your father wanted you to learn." Elira looked at her hands, still shaking from effort. For the first time, she did not see weakness in them. She saw possibility. She whispered to herself, almost afraid to believe it. Stronger than yesterday, Princess Elira woke before dawn, her body already aching from the day before. The training was relentless, and every muscle begged her to rest. But when she thought of Marcus's words, stronger than yesterday, she forced herself out of bed. She dressed in the plain training clothes he had given her, garments far different from the royal silks of her home. They were rough, simple, and stained with dust, but somehow she felt more honest in them. Marcus was already waiting outside, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning her posture. He nodded once. "Good. You're learning to wake on time without me knocking on your door." "I am not a child," she said, though her tone was softer than before. "Then prove it," he replied, handing her a weighted vest. The morning run was brutal. The added weight pressed down on her shoulders, and the cold air cut into her lungs. She stumbled more than once, but Marcus ran beside her silently. He did not mock her, nor did he offer to carry the weight. He let her struggle, knowing the fight was hers alone. When she finally reached the finish line, collapsing onto the ground, he crouched down and said, "You did it. Tomorrow you'll do it faster." She hated the pain, but she could not deny the quiet pride that came with surviving each challenge. For the first time in her life, her victories belonged to her alone. Training continued with weapons. Marcus showed her how to hold a staff, how to move her feet, and how to strike without losing balance. At first her swings were clumsy, her steps too slow, but he corrected her patiently, repeating the same lessons until her movements grew sharper. "A fight is not won by the strongest," he told her. "It's won by the one who refuses to give up." Beyond training, Marcus began teaching her about humanity itself. In the evenings, they sat in the base library where he showed her history books, documentaries, and records of Earth's past. She learned about ancient wars, fallen empires, and the countless times humans had rebuilt themselves from ruins. Every chapter seemed the same: destruction followed by recovery, despair followed by hope. One night she asked him, "Why do humans fight so much? You destroy yourselves, and yet you rise again. Do you not tire of it?" Marcus leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "Of course we tire of it, but the alternative is giving up, and that's something we're not built for. We fall, but we always rise. That's what makes us human. His words stayed with her. She thought of her people, the Thrylan, who had grown so proud, so certain of their strength that they no longer knew how to struggle. When weakness came, they crumbled. Perhaps that was why her father had trusted her to a human. One afternoon, Marcus took her to a small human village outside the base. Unlike the city, it was quiet, with wooden houses and fields stretching toward the horizon. The people here were simple farmers, working under the hot sun. Elira watched as families labored together, children carrying baskets, elders guiding them with patience. Their lives seemed fragile, yet filled with resilience. As they walked through the fields, Marcus pointed to a farmer repairing a broken plow. See him? That tool is older than he is. It breaks every season, and every season he fixes it. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. That's how humans live. Always repairing, always moving forward. Later that day, a sudden storm struck. Heavy rain poured down, winds howled, and part of the village flooded. Elira expected panic, but instead she saw people rushing to help one another. Neighbors tied ropes between houses to guide others through the water. Men carried children on their shoulders. Women gathered supplies to keep the fires burning. Elira stood under the storm, soaked to the bone, watching the chaos transform into unity. She could not understand it fully. Why risk so much for others? Why sacrifice without hesitation? She turned to Marcus, shouting over the rain. They are not soldiers. Why do they act like this? Marcus's eyes were hard but proud. Because that's what it means to be human. We don't wait for orders. When someone falls, we reach out. When disaster strikes, we stand together. That's why your father sent you here. Not to learn how to fight with weapons, but to understand this. The storm passed by nightfall, leaving the village muddy and damaged but alive. Elira helped carry supplies, her arms trembling from effort, yet she felt a strange warmth in her chest. When an old woman thanked her, pressing her hands together in gratitude, Elira was struck silent. She had never been thanked before, not like this. In her home, people bowed because of her title, not because of her actions. This was different. This was real. Back at the base, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at her hands. They were red from labor, her nails broken, her muscles still aching. Yet when she thought of the villagers' faces, of the boy she had helped guide through the flood, she smiled faintly. Marcus entered the room quietly. You did well today. She looked up at him. I only did what everyone else was doing. And that, he said, is the lesson. Strength is not always about standing above others. Sometimes it's about standing with them. For the first time, she felt the weight of her father's choice lifting. Perhaps he had not sent her away as punishment. Perhaps he had sent her here so she could find the strength her people had forgotten. That night, Elira lay awake, not with despair but with determination. She whispered to herself, her voice steady in the quiet room. Tomorrow, I will be stronger. Princess Elira had trained for weeks under Marcus's watch, each day harder than the last. She had learned to run longer, strike harder, and endure more pain than she ever thought possible. But training and real danger were not the same, and she was about to learn that lesson. It began one night when alarms blared across the military base. Red lights flashed and soldiers rushed to their stations. Elira stepped out of her quarters, her heart racing. She had never heard such chaos before. Marcus appeared almost instantly, already in armor, his weapon slung across his shoulder. They've found you, he said, his voice sharp and calm at the same time. Who? She asked, though she already feared the answer. The invaders your father has been fighting. They tracked you here. This time they sent a strike team. Elira froze. She had imagined this moment many times but never believed it would happen so soon. The thought of facing real enemies, creatures who killed without mercy, made her knees tremble. Marcus handed her a weapon, a compact rifle designed for human hands. It felt heavy in hers. almost too much to carry. "You've trained for this," Marcus told her. "Stay close to me, don't panic. Remember what I taught you." Her mouth went dry, but she nodded. She could not let him see her fear. Outside, the night sky lit up with fire as enemy ships descended. Soldiers shouted, gunfire cracked, and the ground shook with explosions. Smoke filled the air, burning her throat. For a moment, she wanted to run back inside, to hide in the safety of walls. But when she looked at Marcus, steady and unshaken, she forced herself to take a step forward. They moved together through the battlefield. Elira struggled to keep her grip steady as strange alien figures leapt from the ships. The invaders were tall and armored, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. They looked stronger than anything she had ever faced. "Cover me," Marcus shouted, diving behind a barrier. Elira raised her rifle, her hands trembling, and fired. The recoil jolted her, but the shot struck true, forcing an enemy to duck back. Her heart pounded wildly. She had just fought back, not in practice, but for real. Marcus rose and returned fire, his movements quick and precise. He fought like a man who had lived on battlefields all his life, and for the first time Elira understood what true experience meant. She followed his lead, copying his movements, remembering his words. "Stay steady. Don't waste your shots." The fight raged on. Explosions lit the field, throwing shadows across the smoke. Soldiers screamed orders, some falling, others rising again to keep fighting. Elira felt fear press against her chest, but every time she thought she could not go on, Marcus's voice cut through the noise. "You can do this. Don't stop." At one point, an enemy warrior broke through the line and charged straight toward Marcus. Elira saw it before he did. Time seemed to slow. Her hands moved without thought. She swung her weapon up, fired, and struck the warrior in the chest. The alien fell with a heavy crash, its weapon clattering to the ground. Marcus turned, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. He gave a quick nod before jumping back into the fight. That small gesture filled her with something she had never felt before: pride. She had saved him. The battle dragged on, and exhaustion crept into her bones. Her arms felt heavy, her breathing ragged, but she refused to give up. Every shot she fired, every step she took, reminded her that she was no longer the fragile princess of her palace. She was standing on the front lines of a human battlefield. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last of the invaders fell. The ground was littered with smoke, debris, and silence, broken only by the moans of the wounded. Elira lowered her weapon, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Marcus approached, his armor scorched, his face streaked with dirt. He looked at her carefully. "You held your ground," he said. "I thought I would fail," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "But you didn't," he replied firmly. "That's what matters. You didn't run. You didn't freeze. You fought." She swallowed hard, her chest tight with emotion. For the first time, she truly believed the change inside her was real. She had always been told she was fragile, too weak to stand on her own. But tonight, she had stood, and she had fought. As the soldiers gathered the wounded and repaired the defenses, Elira sat on a broken wall staring at the sky. Smoke covered the stars, but somewhere beyond them was her father's empire, still burning in war. For the first time, she wondered if she could return there one day, not as a burden, but as a protector. Marcus sat beside her, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "This is only the beginning. Battles will come again, but now you know you can face them." Elira nodded slowly. She felt tired, broken, and sore, but beneath it all, she felt something stronger than pain. She felt the fire of survival, the spark of resilience that humans carried so naturally. And now she carried it too. The days after the battle were heavy with repair and recovery. The base was scarred by fire, walls cracked, and fields turned into ash. Soldiers limped through the grounds, carrying supplies and tending to the wounded. For Elira, the memory of the fight lingered in her body. Her arms still ached from holding the weapon, and her dreams replayed the clash again and again. But beneath the exhaustion was something stronger. For the first time she knew she could stand beside others in battle and not break. Marcus did not give her rest for long. 2 days after the attack, he found her on the training field again. She expected lighter drills because of her soreness, but he handed her a staff and said, "Show me what you've learned." They sparred under the morning sun, wooden staffs cracking against each other. Elira stumbled at first, her body stiff, but as the fight went on, her movements grew sharper. Marcus pressed her hard, forcing her to adapt, to think, to move, without hesitation. When at last she managed to strike his side and make him step back, a small smile spread across her face. "You're improving," he said simply, lowering his staff. She breathed heavily, sweat running down her face. "I beat you." Marcus shook his head with the hint of a smirk. "You made me step back. That's not the same as beating me." She frowned but laughed softly despite herself. It was the first time she laughed during training. Their bond deepened not only on the field, but also in the quiet moments after. In the evenings, Marcus told her stories of Earth's past, leaders who rose from nothing, soldiers who held the line against impossible odds, and explorers who risked everything to discover new worlds. Elira listened with fascination, realizing how much humanity valued not birthright but courage and effort. It was so different from her people, who placed worth in bloodlines and titles. One evening, as they sat near a fire outside the base, Elira asked him, "Do you ever fear? In battle you look so calm, but surely you were afraid." Marcus poked at the flames with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "Fear is always there, but fear doesn't decide what I do. Choice does. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite it." His words sank deep into her heart. She realized then that courage was something she could choose, not something she had to be born with. Over time, others at the base began to notice her change. The soldiers, who once looked at her as a fragile outsider, now watched her train with respect. Some even asked to spar with her, testing her strength. At first she was nervous, but Marcus encouraged her. "You're ready," he said. In these matches, she learned more than fighting. She learned how to read people, how to lead with her presence. When a soldier fell during a drill, she was the first to offer a hand. When supplies were short, she helped carry them without complaint. Small acts, but they did not go unnoticed. Slowly, whispers spread. The alien princess is no longer fragile. One day, a group of alien refugees arrived at the base. They were survivors from her empire, people who had fled the invaders and found shelter on Earth. When they saw Elira, they bowed, expecting the same fragile princess they had once known. But when she stood tall, dressed in training armor, dirt on her hands, their surprise was clear. Elira spoke to them, her voice steady though her heart raced. "I am not the same as I was. I am learning what it means to fight, to endure, to stand with others, and I promise you this, we will not remain victims forever." The refugees looked at her with renewed hope. It was the first time she had ever given words of strength to others, and she felt the weight of it. Marcus, watching from the side, gave her a slight nod. She had taken her first steps as a leader. As weeks passed, her training shifted. Marcus no longer treated her only as a student. He began teaching her strategy, how to read a battlefield, how to think ahead, how to inspire others in the midst of chaos. They spent hours over maps, moving markers, and arguing about tactics. Sometimes she was wrong, but sometimes her sharp mind found paths he had not considered. One evening, after a long session, Marcus leaned back and said, "You're not just becoming a fighter. You're becoming someone others can follow." Her heart stirred at the words. She had always believed she was destined only to be protected, never to protect. Now, the thought that others might one day follow her filled her with both fear and pride. But she also began to see Marcus in a new light. He was more than a soldier. He was a guide, a steady force that demanded the best of her without ever giving up on her. She respected him deeply, and though she would not admit it aloud, she trusted him more than anyone she had ever known. One night, As they looked up at the stars together, Elira whispered, "My father entrusted me to you. At first I hated him for it, but now I think I begin to understand." Marcus did not answer with grand words. He only said, "Then prove him right." The firelight flickered against their faces, and in that moment, Elira felt a bond stronger than duty forming between them, a bond that would carry them both into the battles yet to come. The warning came at dawn. Sirens screamed through the base as soldiers rushed to their stations. The air shook with the distant thunder of engines, and the sky filled with dark shapes descending through the clouds. Enemy ships, larger this time, heavier and armed for war, were coming for them. Elira stood outside her quarters, staring upward, her chest tight. This was not like the small strike she had faced before. This was an invasion. Marcus appeared at her side, fastening his armor, his voice firm. "They're coming in force. This time they mean to wipe us out." Elira swallowed hard. Then, "We fight." He looked at her, searching her eyes. She was no longer the fragile princess who once trembled at every step. She stood tall, weapon strapped across her shoulder, her jaw set with determination. He nodded. "Good. Then let's make them regret this." The enemy ships broke through the clouds, unleashing waves of warriors. The ground shook with explosions as fire lit the horizon. Soldiers scrambled into position, shouting orders, raising defenses. The refugees from Elira's people, now living at the base, gathered in fear. Many were untrained, their eyes wide as they clutched makeshift weapons. Elira's heart twisted at the sight. They looked at her, not as a helpless heir, but as someone who might guide them. She felt the weight of their stares pressing down on her shoulders. For a moment, doubt clawed at her. She was not her father. She was not a commander. She was just a student still learning. But then she remembered Marcus's words. "You're becoming someone others can follow." She stepped forward, raising her voice. "Listen to me. We cannot run, we cannot hide. If we fall here, there will be no one left to carry our people forward. But if we fight together, humans and Thrylan, we can endure." The refugees hesitated, then slowly lifted their heads. A murmur spread through them, voices growing louder, steadier. They believed her. Marcus watched, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Lead them," he said quietly. The battle began with fire raining from the skies. Enemy warriors charged the base, their weapons burning bright. Human soldiers met them head-on, rifles blazing. Elira took command of the refugees, her voice sharp and clear above the chaos. "Hold the line, stay together, watch each other's backs." At first the refugees stumbled, their fear almost breaking them, but Elira moved among them, fighting at their side. She blocked a strike aimed at a young refugee, countering with her staff. She shouted encouragement, her words cutting through the smoke and noise. Slowly, their fear turned to resolve. Marcus led the human soldiers in a fierce counterattack, his rifle spitting fire as he cut through the enemy ranks. Every so often his eyes flicked toward Elira, making sure she held her ground. What he saw surprised him. She was not only surviving, she was commanding. The battle spread across the base, chaos in every direction. Explosions tore through walls, the ground shook under heavy fire, and the air was thick with smoke. Elira led her group to reinforce a weak flank, shouting orders, pointing out enemy positions. Her instincts, sharpened by weeks of training, guided her. When an enemy warlord broke through, towering above the others with massive armor, panic rippled through her fighters. But Elira stood firm. She remembered Marcus's lessons. Don't let fear decide. She signaled for her group to spread out, forcing the warlord to split his focus. Then she darted forward, striking with speed and precision, her staff finding weak points in his armor. The fight was brutal. The warlord's blows rattled her bones, each strike enough to crush her if she faltered, but she refused to yield. With a final swing, she drove her weapon into his chest, knocking him backward. The warlord fell with a crash, and silence followed, for a breath before her fighters erupted with cheers. The victory pushed them onward. With renewed strength, humans and Thrylan fought as one, driving the invaders back step by step. Hours later, when the last enemy ship fled into the sky, the battlefield was littered with smoke and debris. The base was scarred, but it still stood. Exhausted soldiers leaned on one another, cheering faintly through the haze of fire. Illyra stood in the center, her armor dented, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. She could barely breathe, her body aching from head to toe. But when she looked around at the people who had fought under her command, she saw their eyes filled with respect. They did not see a fragile princess. They saw a leader. Marcus approached, his weapon slung across his back, his face grim but steady. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't just fight today. You led. You kept them together when fear would have broken them." Illyra's chest tightened. "I was terrified," she admitted softly. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "So was everyone else. But you gave them courage. That's what makes a leader." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She had not only survived, she had risen. She had carried her people in the darkest hour and proven she was more than the fragile air her empire had abandoned. As night fell and the fires dimmed, Illyra stood with Marcus on the edge of the battlefield, staring at the stars. Somewhere, out there, her father's empire was still in danger, but now for the first time she felt ready to face it. The sun rose slowly over the ruined base, casting a soft glow across the smoke and broken walls. Soldiers moved quietly through the debris, repairing what they could, carrying away the fallen. The air smelled of ash and burned metal, yet in the silence, there was a strange sense of hope. They had survived. They had stood against overwhelming force and endured. Illyra walked through the camp, her steps heavy with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. Everywhere she went, people looked at her with respect. Refugees who once saw her as fragile now bowed their heads in quiet admiration. Soldiers who had doubted her strength saluted as she passed. For the first time, she understood what her father must have felt as a leader, the weight of responsibility and the honor of carrying it. Marcus found her near the edge of the camp where the stars were still visible in the morning sky. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You've changed," he said simply. Illyra gave him a tired smile. "I don't feel like the same person who arrived here. I thought I was weak, someone to be protected, but now, I know I can protect others." He nodded. "Your father will need to see that. The war isn't over. This was only one battle." Her gaze lifted to the horizon. She knew he was right. The invaders would not stop. They had already destroyed worlds, and her empire was still in danger. But for the first time, she felt ready to face that truth. "Then I must return," she whispered. Marcus studied her carefully. "If you go back, you won't return as the daughter he sent away. You'll return as a warrior, maybe even as the leader your people need." The thought made her chest tighten. She had always lived in her father's shadow, a fragile heir to a vast empire. But now she realized she had something even greater, the strength of both her people and the humans who had taught her to rise when everything seemed lost. Days later, a small fleet of ships prepared to leave Earth. Human commanders, impressed by her courage, agreed to send escorts. Illyra stood in her armor, scarred from battle yet polished with pride, ready to face her father's court. Marcus was at her side, silent but steady, his presence giving her calm strength. When their ships reached the Thrylan capital, the scene was tense. The grand halls of her father's palace were filled with nobles, soldiers, and advisors, all murmuring at the sight of the young princess walking in with human soldiers at her back. Many expected to see the same fragile girl who had been hidden away for her safety. Instead, they saw a warrior. The alien king, her father, rose from his throne. His eyes were wide, struggling to believe what he saw. His daughter's steps were firm, her shoulders squared, her eyes filled with fire. She knelt before him, but her voice was strong. "Father, I return not as a child in need of protection. I return as a fighter for our people." The court erupted in whispers. Some doubted her, others stared in awe. The king's face softened with emotion. though he tried to keep his composure. "Elira," he said slowly, "I entrusted you to the humans because I feared for your life. And now you stand before me transformed. Tell me, what did they give you?" She stood tall and answered clearly, her words echoing through the chamber. "They gave me strength. They taught me that even in fear I could fight. They showed me that leadership is not about being unbreakable, but about standing firm when others are ready to fall. I am no longer fragile. I am ready to stand beside you in this war." Her father was silent for a long moment. Then he descended from his throne and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "I see it now. You carry not only the spirit of our people, but the courage of humanity as well. Together, you may be the bridge that saves us all." The hall erupted with cheers. Soldiers saluted her, nobles bowed, and her name spread through the capital like fire. Elira, the once fragile daughter, had returned as a warrior, a symbol of hope. Later, when the court was quiet, she stood with Marcus in the palace gardens. The stars above her home world glimmered just as they had on Earth, but now they looked different, closer, brighter, as if waiting for her to reach them. Marcus spoke softly. "You've taken your place, but the fight ahead will be harder than anything you've faced." Elira nodded, her heart steady. "I know, but I am not afraid anymore. I have my people, I have what I've learned from you, and I will carry both with me. Whatever comes, I will not break." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night was quiet except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then Elira raised her head, her eyes shining with determination. "This war is not the end. It is the beginning of something greater, and I will see it through." With those words, she stepped forward into her new life, not as a hidden heir, not as a fragile daughter, but as a leader who carried the strength of two worlds. And in that moment, both her, people and humanity knew that hope had found its champion.